Imagine boarding a plane that could take you from London to New York in just 3.5 hours. You sip champagne at 60,000 feet, look out the window, and see the curvature of the earth. Below you, the world moves in silence, and ahead of you, the future feels almost within reach. This wasn't science fiction, it was real. It was Concorde. And on October 24, 2003, that dream came to an end. This is the story of the last flight of Concorde Day, how one of the most incredible engineering achievements in human history was born, how it ruled the skies, and how it eventually fell from grace. Let's go back to where it all began. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the world was obsessed with speed. The jet age was booming. People had gone from propeller planes to jet engines in just a decade, and now the next goal was clear: a supersonic flight. If fighter jets could fly faster than sound, why not passenger planes? That idea sparked one of the most ambitious collaborations in aviation history, a partnerships between two unlikely allies, Britain and France. The governments of both nations decided to work together to design a plane that could cruise at twice the speed of sound, a Mach 2.04. or about 2,180 kilometers per hour. They signed a treaty in 1962 that would lock them into the project no matter what happened. And that treaty had one powerful clause, and either side could pull out without both agreeing. The British were building it under the company back, a British Aircraft Corporation. The French had a held the copyright Spatial. The name they chose came from the French word for harmony, a Concorde. At first, everyone was excited. This was the future, a plane that could fly from London to New York in half the time of any other jet. But as the years passed, problems started to pile up. The engineering challenges were insane. Flying at twice the speed of sound meant friction with the air would heat the aircraft's aluminum skin to over 127 degrees Celsius. That meant the entire plane would expand by almost 30 centimeters during flight. The engineers had to design special joints, materials, and even windows that could handle that kind of thermal stress. Then came the engines. They needed something powerful, efficient, and reliable enough to cruise at 60,000 feet. The Rolls-Royce/Snecma Olympus 593 engines became legendary as the only turbojets capable of sustained supersonic cruise on a passenger plane. But they were also deafeningly loud and burned fuel like there was no tomorrow. And that was just the technical side. Politically, Concorde became a nightmare. Costs exploded far beyond what either country had expected. The original estimate of a £70 million balloon to over a £1.3 billion. That's more than a £10 billion in today's money. Many critics called it a vanity project, a supersonic white elephant. Even so, in 1969, the first prototype took to the skies. And when it did, the world stopped to watch. The long, sleek delta wings, the sharp nose that could droop for takeoff and landing, it looked like something from the future. Concorde wasn't just a plane, it was art. But the real question was who would buy it? Initially, over a dozen airlines showed interest. Pan Am, Qantas, TWAA, everyone wanted a piece of this futuristic jet. But as the oil crisis hit in the 1970s, enthusiasm evaporated, the price of fuel quadrupled, and the idea of burning through tons of jet fuel just to save a few hours suddenly didn't make financial sense. Then came politics again. The United States banned supersonic overland flights because of the sonic boom that explosive crack caused when breaking the sound barrier. That meant Concorde could only fly supersonically over oceans. It was a massive blow. By the mid-1970s, only two airlines were still interested, British Airways and Air France. The governments owned both, so they had little choice but to operate Concorde. In 1976, the world's first supersonic passenger service began. The first commercial flights, London to Bahrain for British Airways and Paris to Rio for Air France, marked a new chapter in aviation. Soon, both shifted focus to the transatlantic route, London and Paris to New York and Washington, D.C. And that's when Concorde truly became a legend. Flying on Concorde wasn't just about getting there faster, it was about prestige. The cabin only held around 100 passengers. The tickets cost up to 4 times the price of a regular first-class seat. Celebrities, CEOs, and royalty loved it. Mick Jagger, Elton John, Princess Diana, Phil Collins say they were all regulars. Fun fact, during Live 8 in 1985, Phil Collins performed in London, jumped on Concorde, and then performed again in Philadelphia the same day. That's how fast this plane was. At its peak, Concorde was an experience like no other. The takeoff was loud and powerful, with afterburners glowing orange as it roared down the runway. Within minutes, it would be climbing through 50,000 feet, leaving subsonic jets far below. At Mach 2, you could actually see the air temperature outside hit 108 degrees Ca and the aircraft's nose would stretch as the aluminum expanded. From the window, the sky wasn't blue anymore, it was dark indigo. You were practically on the edge of space. Passengers were given champagne, caviar, and fine dining as the earth curved beneath them. It was, in every sense, a glimpse of the future. But behind the glamour, cracks were forming literally and financially. Concorde was expensive to run. It guzzled fuel, maintenance costs were sky high, and tickets, while premium, weren't enough to cover everything. Still, British Airways figured out a secret: status pricing. They discovered that their wealthy clientele didn't care about cost as long as Concorde remained exclusive, so they doubled ticket prices and surprisingly, sales increased. By the 1980s and 1990s, Concorde was still a marvel, but it was also aging. Technology in regular planes was improving fast. Boeing's 747 and later the Airbus A340 could carry hundreds of passengers across the Atlantic in comfort and at a fraction of the cost. The world was moving toward efficiency, not speed. And then came July 25, 2000. At a day everything changed. Air France Flight 4590 was preparing for takeoff from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. The destination, New York City. But as the Concorde raced down the runway, a piece of metal that had fallen from another aircraft punctured one of its tires. The tire exploded, sending rubber fragments into the fuel tank. A massive fire erupted. Seconds later, the left engine failed. The plane struggled to gain altitude and crashed into a hotel in Ghana, killing all 109 people on board and 4 on the ground. It was the first and only fatal Concorde crash in its 27-year history, but it shattered the aircraft's spotless safety record and its image of invincibility. After the accident, all Concorde flights were grounded. Engineers worked around the clock to fix the issues, reinforcing fuel tanks, fitting new tires, and adding Kevlar linings. Concorde eventually returned to service in November 2001, but by then, the world had changed. The September 11 attacks just months earlier had devastated the aviation industry. Passenger numbers plummeted, and security costs soared. Suddenly, flying supersonic luxury jets didn't seem practical or profitable. In 2003, both British Airways and Air France announced they would retire Concorde. Rising costs, falling demand, and outdated technology sealed its fate. And so, on October 24, 2003, British Airways Flight 002 took off from New York's JFK Airport bound for London Heathrow. It was Concorde's final commercial flight. As it taxied onto the runway, crowds gathered around the airport perimeter. Thousands of people had come to witness history at the last takeoff of the most iconic passenger plane ever built. Inside, passengers toasted with champagne, aware they were part of something extraordinary. At 10:30 a.m., the engines roared one last time, and Concorde surged into the sky. For 3.5 hours, it cruised effortlessly at Mach 2, faster than a bullet, higher than any other commercial jet. As it descended toward London, 3 other Concordes, 2 retired and 1 on display, joined in formation to welcome it home. It was a breathtaking sight, the sound of the Olympus engines echoing across the sky for one final farewell. When Concorde touched down at Heathrow, the crowd erupted in applause. Many cried. Even the pilots were emotional. Captain Mike Bannister, who commanded that final flight, later said, "It felt like saying goodbye to a friend." And just like that, the era of supersonic passenger travel was over. So why did Concorde really fail? Was it the cost, the crash, or something deeper? The truth is that it was a mix of everything. Concorde was ahead of its time, but it was also trapped by it. The world that built Concorde was chasing speed, but the world that retired it was chasing efficiency. Rising fuel prices, environmental concerns, and limited routes meant it could never truly go mainstream. Yet even today, more than 20 years after its last flight, Concorde still captures our imagination. People who saw it fly still describe the sound day, that deep, thunderous roar that rattled windows and hearts alike. Aviation fans still gather around the preserved Concordes displayed in museums around the world, from London and Manchester to New York, Seattle, and Paris. And perhaps most interestingly, companies today are trying again. Boom Supersonic, for instance, is working on a new generation of supersonic passenger jets, faster, quieter, and more efficient than ever before. They hope to bring back what Concorde once promised, a world where time and distance mean less. But can they truly succeed where Concorde failed? That remains to be seen. Concorde was never just a plane. It was a symbol of ambition, of innovation, of human daring. It showed us what was possible when countries put aside competition and dreamed together. When you look back at the images of Concorde slicing through the sky, its slender white body gleaming in the sunlight, you can't help but feel awe. It wasn't practical, it wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. The last flight of Concorde wasn't the end of an aircraft, it was the end of an era. An era when humanity dared to chase the impossible and caught it, even if just for a little while. Because sometimes, progress isn't about how long it lasts, it's about how high it takes us, and how deeply it inspires us to reach again. So, next time you see a plane flying overhead, think about that one aircraft that didn't just fly faster than sound, it flew faster than imagination itself. That was Concorde, and that was her final flight.